Okay, so good morning or good afternoon, everybody. This is 154th session of the Urban Workshop organized by the CPR and the CSH. And today we have the pleasure of listening to Dibya Kusum Ray, who is assistant professor at IIT Ropar, where he teaches English, philosophy, and cultural studies. Dibya just published a book published by Routledge in 2022, and the title of the book is the Post-Colonial Indian City, Literature, Policy, Politics, and Evolution. And so today, as you could guess from the title of the paper, this is going to be a slightly different session, looking at the city, of course, but through the angle of literature. And I'm really looking forward to exploring the notion of city literature. Dibya, of course, will focus today on the 1980s and 1990s. So as usual, we will listen to you, and then we'll have, I hope, a long Q&A session. So Dibya, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Thank you very much, Mukta. Thank you very much, Mariela. And thanks very much to CPR and CSH for giving me this opportunity. First of all, it's wonderful to be here. And it's doubly great for me because I get to speak about something with a greater detail, although my talk will be invariably based on the book that Stephanie so kindly talked about right now. But even then, I get to focus on a certain aspect of my writing, one that excites me a lot regarding urbanism and all that, which I probably didn't get to do before. Having said that, and I have a presentation ready, and I'll be presenting that. But before that, let me just also clarify to you that I was asking Mukta actually over email that who will be the speaker, who will be the audience in this talk, as in who am I speaking to, what level of engagement as such can be expected from it. So by her answer, I'm guessing that it's generally urban scholars as such, and as Stephanie said, that literature probably a little bit of an untrodden thing right now in the scheme of this particular workshop. Probably there hasn't been much. So there is one the whole reason why I'm saying this is that there is one caveat that I would like to present, is that I am not a sociologist and neither a historian. I'm just pretending to be one. What I am is actually a literary scholar. What I mean to say is that literature is actually the central focus. Whatever sociological observations that I have made in here, whatever data that I'd be presenting to you, probably would be like very common for a trained sociologist as such. Anybody who crunches data for a living would be seeing them. And there is nothing, at least in that part, there is nothing tremendously exciting about it, I'm afraid. So with that, I guess I would be sharing my screen with you, and I'll be giving the time, which is 45 minutes. I have taken enough classes in my life to do that, but I'll first stop my video because that's a bit of a distraction for me. And I will share the screen, which will be coming to you in a second. Give me a second, please. Yes, and here we go. Hopefully it's visible. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my talk, Without a Past, Without History, Free, the Commercial, Local, and the Fringed Indian City Lit 1980s to 90s. The majority of this talk is indebted to the book that Stefan introduced, The Post-Colonial Indian City, Literature, Policy, Politics, and Evolution, which came in March 2022. And I have tried in my own way to focus on a particular topic, which in literary academia as such may be, again, a little rare in the sense that, literary academia is often I don't know, it's often accused of being a little bit of an elite zone. It's literature that we talk about. After all, it's literature. It's something hermetic. It's something that has its own superiority over other disciplines and all that. This is where I tried to differ to a certain extent in this book, and I've tried to present this whole argument through the garb of a sociological meta-narrative. What I mean by that is probably what is going to be clearer through the talk. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see over here, that it's just one data, and this is about the growth of urban population. Again, there is nothing new in that, but I would still like to stress on the fact that, as you can see, it's this one is urban population. This is the percentage of total population that is urban, and this is the annual percentage of change. Just let me start with an anecdote saying that I teach in an IIT, and when I was teaching this course, Introduction to Urban Literariness, about a semester ago, and naturally the STEM subject students mostly, naturally that's what we get mostly. So they came to the class, and that was a pretty heavy class, and the moment I started with this particular slide and I explained it, because they're not very accustomed to looking at these the data and the graphs and all that in a sociological sense. So the first question that they asked me, that this can't be, this has to be.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. I'm not sure your PowerPoint is moving, because at this stage, what I see is the title slide.
Okay. Is this moving now?
No, it's still the title slide.
Okay, I must be doing something wrong. Just give me a second. Just give me a second. Okay. I'm not exactly sure why this is happening. Just give me a second here. Yeah, so let me just try to share it again. And if need be, I will not go full screen, if that is okay.
Sure. And why don't you leave your video? It's nice to see your face while you're talking.
Okay, it's a little distracting for me, but anyway, I'll do it. No issues at all.
Oh, okay. If it's disturbing, don't. But then.
Okay, great. I'll be back then.
Or it's better.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Is it visible now, and is it changing? These are the two questions that I need to ask.
Yeah, it's visible. It's changing. It's a bit smaller, of course, because
it is smaller. I totally get that, and I would try to make it as large as possible. But if I go again in the full screen mode, I'm not exactly sure what happens. But anyway, I'll try my best. Yeah. So this is the first slide. Let me just try it again then.
Okay.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly what I was talking about. Whenever I show them the slide, I'm really sorry about the technical mishap before. It's a little distracting for me as well. Anyway, so the first thing that they tell me is this can't happen. This can't be the reality as such. Why? Then I ask, and the students say that, but we see that the number is increasing, because the cities that we used to live in, even in our childhood, which let's say 15 years ago, they're all 18, 19 or something, they are not livable anymore as far as the population is concerned. And we can't even recognize it when we go back from the university and all that. But over here, down here, as you can see, the annual percentage of change, and that is the catch actually, the annual percentage of change in Indian cities is decreasing. This is again, for a sociologist, it must be a very common knowledge. It is decreasing, and there is more than enough reason for that decrease. But then again, there is one particular manifestation of this particular event that I would like to focus on proceeding. And please tell me if the slide has changed. Stephanie, is it changing now?
Yeah, it changes. It's okay.
Oh, great, awesome. So focusing more towards the last one, which is this one, focusing more over here, let's say zooming it out, as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, is basically from 1980s, actually 75, we can see a very clear spike in the population change towards the upside, that the population change has really increased. But then from 1980s, there has been a steady decline, and it goes down further, having a little bit of a spike again 2005-ish, but then again afterwards it's still going down. And of course there is another data again might be common, which is the percentage of urban population by size class. Size class is something that, of course, I mean, how many people live in a particular city, million, 10 million, and stuff like that. So not to go into the details of it, because this is not exactly what I'm focusing on, but as you can see that class one cities have had a percentage of urban population. So by, let's say, 1981, 60.3% of the total urban population of this particular country was living in class one size cities, call it whatever you may. Whereas number two, it drops down to 11.6 and so on and so forth. 14.3, maybe a little bit spike, but then again 9.5, 3.5. And it's not that only, it increases 60.3, 65.2. But the question is that as a literary scholar, what am I supposed to get from here? What I'm supposed to be getting, what I actually thought is striking is pretty obvious, that people are going towards the cities that are already established. G.S. Ghurye has talked about it in 1953, saying that the bargaining pressure on the already established cities of India is going to be a problem in the coming decades. And it seems that that is kind of at least partially coming true. Again, growth of million+ cities and their population, and almost the same thing, from 1971, 9 to 12, and so on, 23, 80s and 90s. These are the two, let's say, two sections that we are talking about. So 12 to 23, and population in million is increasing over here as well. 42, 70, 6.16 to 8.37. That is the percentage of total population. But when it comes to total urban population, then we have a completely different kind of a data. It's 26.41 and 32.54. Proceeding even further, I would like you to look at this particular thing. Transfer from rural areas. 1981, 23,000.88 in thousands, that is, and this has increased. As you can see, it's increased twofold, actually more than that. As a percentage of growth, it's 35 to 47%, pretty huge. No doubt about that. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what I tried to fixate on. Let's say this is the insertion point as such for me into this particular research domain, is that that there is this long-standing ambivalence, and this is from Ramachandra Guha, long-standing ambivalence towards the city in Indian nationalist public political discourse, and more widely in international perception of India's cities, was replaced by a more celebratory emphasis on the entrepreneurial of world-class cities as the prime signifier of economic arrival. 1980s and 90s, anybody with the slightest knowledge of Indian history would be knowing that this is also the initiation of what we now know as the neoliberalization of India, and the effect that it had on the cities, as per Guha says in here, is that in international perceptions of Indian cities was replaced by a more celebratory emphasis on the entrepreneurial of world-class cities as the prime signifier of economic arrival. So basically making this a rush towards making world-class cities, this rush towards making the cities seem like world-class, creates gaps in the argument of an overall betterment of the city in the 1980s and 90s. And enough work from a multidisciplinary perspective has been done on this. We have known, especially from cinema studies and all that, that cities started to have a new kind of a, let's say, an ideal, an icon in the time of 1990s, especially with the advent of Shah Rukh Khan, where the films would be based, generally would be based in cities which are in the foreign countries. It's a very Indian love story unfolding in a foreign city. So the backdrop becomes a character. The cities, the urban space, this certain fixation towards a visual representation of an urbanity is something that has been done in a very multidisciplinary mode. Indian cities in 1980s to 90s are also going in this direction. It's not a question of whether it is so or not. It's not a question of whether these things are achievable or is this pure fantasy. It's a question that this is the truth. It was trying to go historically, especially in retrospect. If you look at the data and all that, it just happens. And again, the same data comes in front of us. As you can see, percentage of distribution, 1981, class 1 cities were sporting 60.42% of the total population of the urban, of the total urban population. I'm sorry about that. Yes, and 1991, it's even more, 65.2. So there are a number of reasons, ladies and gentlemen, why this is happening. Of course, anybody, again, a little bit of knowledge of Indian history would be knowing the 1980s to 1980s especially is one of the toughest and darkest time, even after 1975, after the emergency, that is, toughest and darkest time and the most unstable time probably in the history of Indian democracy. No government was stable. At least 2 assassinations happened in this particular decade. Indira Gandhi, after her assassination, again, this whole political rigmarole happened, which was going towards a huge hindrance, a roadblock in the way of an overall development of the cities and the country in general. Even in that mode, even in that dark time, Rajiv Gandhi and the Congress version 2, if we can call it, were going slowly but steadily towards the neoliberalization, which is basically opening the Indian markets for foreign investment. Everybody knows that. So this particular time, this particular difficulty, this rush, this, should we say, crisis, people are coming into the city. All the other smaller cities are, I don't know, they're languishing to a certain extent for the lack of people, for the lack of infrastructure, for the lack of everything. On the other hand, the cities that are, let's say, so-called infrastructurally advanced, they are sporting more and more people, naturally creating kind of a chokehold on the basic ethos of the city. People are living side by side. The slum situation, which was, and there again has been writings on this, which was a disaster in the form of HUDCO and all that. But even maybe calling it a disaster is too much, but then again, it's very partially successful because due to corruption, internal corruptions and all that, the housing schemes that were supposed to go to a certain class of the society went to other people in a cheaper price who could already afford it. So slums, for example, all these results are being visible in the city life in the 1980s and the 90s. From on one side, there is a rush towards commercialization. There are cosmetic things being done. In the 1990s especially, there is this huge outflow of people from the country to other places, which we otherwise know as diaspora. multinational brands are coming into the country. The cities were awash with neon lights and other signifiers of prosperity, so to speak. On the other hand, Calcutta was suffering from 100 megawatt shortage of electricity almost every day, and we will be coming into that. But before that, leaving you at that juncture, allow me to come to the idea of flâner. I know that this is a little abrupt, might seem a little bit abrupt, but I will come back to my previous point, and I would try to merge these two. Ladies and gentlemen, as far as city literature is concerned, the Western city literary part, and at least the most important couple of books written on this particular topic, one by Cities and Literature by Malcolm Miles, and the other is The City in Literature by Richard Lehan. They both talk about almost the same thing. The same thing is that the Western city literary tradition is based on the concept of the flâneur. F-L-A-N-E-U-R, flâneur. Who is the flâneur? The flâneur, that is the outline of Dumas' Mohican de Paris. The hero of this book decides to go forth in search of adventure by following a scrap of paper, which he was given to the wind to play with. No matter what trail the flâneur may follow, every one of them will lead him to a crime. This is an indication of how the detective story, regardless of its sober calculations, also participates in fashioning the phantasmagoria of Parisian life. As yet, it does not glorify the criminal, though it does glorify his adversaries and, above all, the hunting grounds where they pursue him. I will explain, let me just go ahead a little bit, again from the same book. This is the idea of a man long resident in Paris, a public man, and one whose walks to and fro in the city have been mostly limited to the vicinity of the public offices. He passes to and fro at regular intervals within a confined periphery, abounding in individuals who are led to observation of his person through interest in the kindred nature of his occupation with their own. So who is a flâneur? Flâneur is a citizen who takes pleasure from the visual and oral and psychosomatical representation of the city that is flowing around him. Flâneur is generally a bourgeois person of, especially in the classical sense. It could be Hugo, it could be Charles Baudelaire, it could also be Edgar Allan Poe. These three figureheads who has established the idea of a flâneur. Flâneur is generally a bourgeois person, not in want of money, in other hands, who is just going through the city, the sight, sound, smell, experience of the city. He is involved and uninvolved. He is within and outside. He basically is that particular blade of grass that is just flowing in the stream. Only difference is that there is no fatalism in it. He is enjoying that scenario, that overwhelming sensation of the city coming towards him. Very artistic, classist to a certain extent, of course, but that was what the flâneur was. And just to give you an example from Charles Baudelaire, to a passerby from his particular book, Le Flux du Mal, and amid the deafening traffic of the town, this two stanzas, amid the deafening traffic of the town, tall, slender, in deep mourning, with majesty, a woman passed, raising with dignity in her poised hand the flounces of her gown. Graceful, noble, with a statue's form, and I drank, trembling as a madman thrills. From her eyes, ashen sky, where brooded storm, the softness that fascinates, the pleasure that kills. It's sensual, One might argue that up to a certain extent, it's erotic as well, up to a certain extent, and there is no denial that Baudelaire is trying to draw a parallel between a lady who has got his fancy and the city itself. Again, it's a very, very sensual relation to the city, a soiree into the city, an experience that can never be like going away, ebbing away and stuff like that. You will have to be in it. You will have to enjoy it. And it's not actually a choice. You just, if you're a Flâner, you are a lover of the city itself. Paul Gavarni in 1842. That is the visual representation as such. I know this is trite. This is really trite, but still, I just thought to give you a visual representation of it. It's, again, coming to literature, a more prosaic literature as such, you would be recognizing these lines. Anybody would be recognizing these lines. This is James Joyce's Ulysses. Again, another example of the Flâner. And why am I speaking so much of the Flâner in context of Indian city literature is simply because I would like to establish why and how Indian city literature, especially of the 1980s and 90s, is different from this Western conception, or should we say preconception of city literature based on the enjoyment, or rather should we say sensual enjoyment of the urban periphery as such. Please read on with me. Cityful passing away, other cityful coming, passing away too, other coming on, passing on, houses, lines of houses, streets, miles of pavements, piled of bricks, stones, changing hands, this owner, that, landlord never dies, they say, other steps into his shoes when he gets his notice to quit. They buy the place up with gold and still they have all the gold. Swindle in it somewhere, piled up cities, worn away age after age, pyramids in sand, built on bread and onions, slaves, Chinese wall, Babylon, big stones left, round towers, rest rubble, sprawling suburbs, jerry-built, caravans, mushroom houses, built of breeze, shelter for the night. Well, but anybody who is even remotely familiar with Ulysses would be knowing that this is a rather a proletarian background. The person, the hero of the novel is from a proletarian, not proletarian, but certainly not rich. But then again, even then, the idea of Flannery is not subsiding in here. Again, the city is coming towards Leopold in all its sight, sound, and color. It can be, I mean, again, it has to be taken in a very holistic manner. There are good things, there are bad things, there are moral, there are immoral things, sublime and gritty. All of them together is creating that unforgettable experience. Not that Indian city literature has never been associated itself to Flannery. No. Not really. There has been, but there is a very crucial difference. I would try to make this particular section a little smaller so that I can concentrate on the other parts, but still, Voices in the City, Anita Desai's in 1965, again, based in Calcutta, just a few lines maybe. His dark and demoniac dreams that groveled mostly in the grossness of the city. It's shapeless, colorless, and grim old houses and slums then heaved up like the radio aerials and pigeon roosts that collected the fuzz of smoke on the roofs, and now and then rose and fled like a scattering of mother-of-pearl pigeons into a forbidding sky. Again, a very tangible, very visual, something that you can almost smell and touch, a description like that. Till this point, undoubtedly, this is Flannery. He spoke with conceit and malice. He disregarded his companions with fine philosophic detachment, then noisily crashed into their midst again. He boasted of his various wild experiences, declaring them unique in one of his social class, little realizing it was a city that had thrust them upon him inexorably. Then with unconscious candor, he wondered aloud what to make of it all. Overwhelming, yes. A certain sense of not being able to make out what it really is, yes. But there are other aspects of Indian city literature, especially the 1980s to 90s, but generally throughout, that actually needs a little bit of a little bit of thinking, maybe. For example, in Pratibandhi, which in other words, if translated in English, should be The Adversary by Sunil Gangapathy, written in 1974, maybe make it clearer to us why and how this is different. Chaurangi was full of the afternoon bustle. Trams, buses, motor cars rushed along. Some people crossed the street idly. Nobody bothered to notice Siddhartha. He stood still for some time, fuming and helpless. The corners of his eyes smarted. His fingertips burned. His breath seemed to be on fire. His face felt as if blood would burst from it in any moment. He was unable to think of what he should do next. Oh, if he could lay his hands on a machine gun, he would kneel down and open fire, rat-tat-tat, destroying everything, blow that building to bits, shoot each of them like cattle. But no, there was nothing he could do except stare at the building. There were so many people in the street, but no one cared to know what had happened to Siddhartha. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what I'm talking about, actually. The Flannery of Indian city literature is again and again interrupted by a sense of urban grind. The politics and the history of Indian urbanism is as such, and the sociologists present in here will be able to correct me if I'm wrong, that to let it go, just to lose yourself in the sight and sound of the city, probably because of the tremendous pressure of reality, because of this pressure of just living your life on a day-to-day basis, going through the city, trudging yourself along. Poverty, frustration, unemployment, striations within the society. I mean, just to name it, basically, are so intense. The load of such experiences are so intense that this losing yourself, losing the literary self into a preconceived beat of the city probably is not possible. Ladies and gentlemen, my argument is, and I'm already more than half of my mark, I guess, but my argument is that in the 1980s and 90s, this anti-Flannery is what I would prefer to call it, this anti-Flannery of Indian city literature, owing chiefly to its political history and its history of urbanism, its let's say its mutation of what the cities were becoming throughout the 80s and 90s, owing to that, has really gone to a certain extreme as such. The 1980s and the Indian cities, again, a little bit of data here and there. They'll straight go into the two works that I would like to present in front of you. The more incendiary and divisive the situation of the state became, the more desperate the reformations were. More than a tangible social reform, it affected the socio-economic perspective of the citizens, germinating new modes of divide, existentialism, bias, and alternations. A decelerated growth of 1.74% per annum compared to the 3.37% per annum the previous decade in total agricultural output, at least till early 2000s, as it happened started from 80s to 90s. Went up to 2000s. The cities themselves were transformed into heteropolis, a hybrid space with a variety of actors ranging from grassroots organizations to policymakers, urban planners, and private developers influencing its production. bargaining under poor growth of economy. The cities looked worn out, full with an ethnically variant crowd that has come to distrust each other. Military presence was everywhere. The newspapers were busy reporting either separatist unrest or ministerial assassinations. Big cities like Calcutta experienced more than 100 megawatt shortage of required electricity on an average day, often plunging the city into complete darkness, and so on and on. Ladies and gentlemen, I wouldn't be testing your patience with this. What I'm asking you to do along with me is to try and feel how all of these so-called figments of reality, figments of urban reality, can be translated through an literary mode. As you can see, especially if city literature all over the world, especially in the Western world, is going towards the flannery way, where your emotions would generally be controlled by the overwhelmingness of the city itself. Is this not overwhelming? Yes, it is, but there is a difference in the overwhelmingness. There is a grind, a kind of a pulling back. You want to flow away with the sight and sound of the city, but you can't, because there is a whole background of class, caste, deprivation, housing, food, money, and several other concerns that would hold you back, grounding you to reality. And that tension, that crisis, that grind again would be coming through the literature as such. The first walk, and this is the last phase of my talk, the first walk is from Manjula Padmanabhan, Lights Out, 1984. Ladies and gentlemen, one thing, I mean, basically I mean, of course, I can go on and on regarding this. There has been so many works, and there is another thing which probably is coming a little late, but nobody writes a literature thinking that this is going to be part of a canon called city lit. City lit, even if it can be called a canon, it's very, very fresh, started only in 2019, is something that is an afterthought by interlopers like myself, who has been thinking about canonizing them all together. My point is that any literature as such can be called a city lit if it has its hearts, like, I don't know, is set within the ethos of the city, the city, the urban realism that the author is writing from or would like to capture and stuff like that. So Manjula Padmanabhan, extremely sorry about the typing mistakes over there. It's not Manula, it's Manjula. There should be a J over there. Manjula Padmanabhan, Lights Out, came out in 1984. It's a play, a very short play, very successful too. And it is based on a certain event that happened somewhere in Mumbai, where in a slum, or maybe in the vicinity of a gated high-rise community, a woman was being raped, and nobody came out of the gated community to, I don't know, to inquire or call the police or take the proper measures. Nothing really happened. It came out in the newspaper. Padmanabhan wrote an entire play out of this, and the whole play, not exactly very subtle. Manjula cannot be called like a really subtle writer, because he has this issue, she has this issue in her mind, the issue that has to be translated with a sledgehammer force, so to speak. So as you can see, the very first lines in here, the curtain rises to reveal the drawing dining area of a 6th floor apartment in a building in Bombay. The decor is unremarkably upper middle class. The audience can see the sky and the rooftop of the neighboring building, as yet unpainted. During the first scene, the sky wanes from dusk into night. A sofa and 2 armchairs are in the foreground, partially obscuring the dining table, which occupies the area between the drawing room and the window. A certain sort of a detachment. This is why I call this anti-Flannery. A certain sort of a detachment that everything is beneath you. The city, I mean, what is your reality? That's basically it. flaneur or the flannery in Western city lit would not be engaging itself into such layerizations or striations, everything all at once. On the other hand, here, from the very beginning, the literature by itself is trying to make the audience conscious. The play by itself is trying to make its audience in the theater, there itself, trying to make conscious that this is a detached, unremarkably upper middle class setting, where just to stave off the claustrophobia as such, there are windows, there are rooftop of the neighboring building, all that you can see. The sky wanes from dusk to night, and that's all you can see. And then in that house, in that household, in that drawing room, a party goes on. As the party was going on, the screaming start from outside. And as you can see, like in a very typical fashion, people in that party bring their class consciousness outside themselves. Oh, how can you talk of these things? And there is a fair amount of crying, you see, so tears as well to add to the phlegm. Tears, you think they're actually crying? Well, yes, I think so. It sounds like it anyway. So rasping, gurgling, crying, we're getting a clearer picture of things now. And is it genuine screaming then? So it's the detachment, the urban detachment, the flannery is being defeated here with such a clear-cut force as such that there can be no argument for its sake afterwards. That even the scream, the agonized scream of a rapist is not creating the automatic and the natural, quote unquote, reaction out of the characters of the play. Leela goes melodramatically hysterical as she can't take the infernal noise anymore. And the brawny last entrant at the party, Surinder, concludes that the screams have to be stopped because it is violating the peace of the colony, screwing this whole bloody colony. Damn it, they know that we are all standing here, shitting in our pants, too scared to do anything but watch. At the end, comically frustrated by their debilitation, the hosts and the guests commence the ultimate violation of the victims, taking photographs of the act. However, again, very anti-flaneur. However, the screaming stopped by them. Surinder, what are you saying? Nana, they have all gone. Leela, disappointingly, oh, it must be over for tonight. The lights cut out quickly. The cast moves aside to afford an unimpeded view of the curtain over the window. That's it. The reality, the city, that is the role that it has to play. Creating disturbances. Creating disturbances lie unresolved, and after all these things are said and done, there must come a window, a kind of a barrier between the people inside and the reality outside. Next and the last is, Mukta, do I have, or Stephanie, do I have about 10 more minutes?
You can take another 7 minutes.
Okay, 7 minutes at ease. So Khushwant Singh in 1990 was talking about his novel, Delhi, a novel, where a middle-aged, sardonic, unattractive, and semi-autobiographical, irreverent Sikh journalist come tour guide who has left London life and come back to spend his days in Delhi. And then I'll just skip over this point. So basically, Khushwant Singh is a reverse diasporic citizen. He has left London to come back to live in Delhi alongside his companion and sexual partner, hermaphrodite, a fille de joie of Delhi called Bhagmati. And Bhagmati, the fact that she is somewhere between a man and a woman is taken as a symbol as a reflection on the city of Delhi itself. And the novel itself moves from one chapter to the other and moves in time as well. One particular chapter talks about the reality of the city now, reality of Delhi now in 1990. On the other hand, the other is talking about the rich tapestry of history that Delhi has gone before. This is exactly how we learn about, for example, about Jaita Rangreta of Rikabganj. We learn about Aurangzeb. We learn about Nadir Shah, Mir Taqi Mir, the Anglo-Indian Alice Atwell. There are several things that has made the city what it was. So the reason why am I putting this particular novel in here, because that other part, that past part of the city, that is an experiential flannery for the author. Experiential flannery. There are several things that are coming all at once towards the author, and he's taking it in. But now, as in right now, the very basic reality of the city that is in front of him is making a huge challenge to match these two sections. There are, and with this I'll stop, there are red flags outside a petrol station with 3 men chanting "Death to petrol station wala." Red flags outside Dr. Sen's nursing home, 6 men yelling "Death to doctors." Red flags outside Food and Agricultural Ministry building. 4 men in garlands sit cross-legged on the lawn. A placard in front of them says, "Third day of a relay hunger strike." A procession with saffron flags goes along Parliament Street chanting, "Our religion and our country are one. The cow is our mother. Death to cow eaters." On the lawns of Connaught Circus, there is a political meeting. The speaker yells into the mic, all together cry, "Jai Hind." The crowd obeys, "Jai Hind." This chaos is not flannery. This is not enjoyable. This is exactly where something Indian city literature, ladies and gentlemen, is very, very different from the city literature meta-narrative that has been in the Western countries. And especially if we look at the 80s and 90s, this sense of bewilderment only increases. I think I'm just on the threshold of my given time, and that'll be it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Divya. You actually stopped a bit before the end of your time, but it's okay. We are going to have ample time for discussion, which is great, because with this talk, you really invite us for us who are not specialists of literature, to think about the relationship between literature and social sciences. And I have a lot of questions to ask. I will take advantage of my position here to start the discussion. So yeah, as I was saying, it's quite evident when you read novels in particular, or even poetry, that literature feeds on social sciences. I mean, novels, even poems, are full of history, geography, gender studies, even now. But the reverse question, which is not so, whose answer is not so evident, is what is the status of works of literature for us social scientists? How do we use literature when we do social sciences? And this is a question which is being asked more and more seriously, at least in the French context. There are lots of, symposia being organized about literature and social sciences these days. So I think it's very important to take it seriously, because we all use the literature that we read, first of all, for our enjoyment, to better understand, to better know the cities we work on, or even the cities we live in. But having said that, then what? Should we consider that literature is a reflection of reality? And it seems to me that this is the main angle that you have taken in the work that you have presented today. Or should we consider it more as a subjective filter onto reality, something that precisely, and again, you have mentioned this also, something that give us a view not only of the city, but also of the character, walking or working or murdering someone in the city, and of course of the author. But of course, I think we also have to pay attention to the fact that literature is shaping our idea of the city. just like cinema has shaped our idea of the city, and we cannot imagine New York without, thinking of films by Woody Allen or Martin Scorsese, or probably more recent filmmakers as well. I think Khushwant Singh, for me, I mean, I cannot see Delhi without having Khushwant Singh in mind. I was thinking for Kolkata, I mean, Amitav Ghosh, The Kolkata Chromosome was a novel which really shaped my vision of Kolkata when I first went there. And about Bombay, I was thinking of Kolatkar's Kalagoda. I mean, Kolatkar, sitting in his cafe and observing what is going on. He's an he's a flanner. Kolatkar is very much a flanner who doesn't move, but very much a flanner all the same. Okay, so having said that, now I turn to my first series of questions, and then I'm going to leave the floor to others as well. The first question is, Indian literature, of course, is multilingual. I don't know to what extent you work on literature in other Indian languages than English, but if you do, could you give us a sense of any difference that you see in, the approach of Indian writers to the city when they write in English, when they write in another Indian language? Another question is the canon. You spoke about the literary canon. What would be the canon of city literature when it comes to India? And what would be the criteria of making the canon? Is it works that have sold a lot? Is it works that are being taught in schools, in universities? Is it works that for some reason, have achieved prominence at some point because of what happened to their authors? Or I don't know. And I can't read my notes anymore. I scribbled so much. So I'm going to stop at that for the time being. Perhaps you can start answering, and then we can, I think there is at least another question.
Yes, absolutely. So I would try to take these two questions together and provide probably an answer that would address them both. The second is the canon. What is the canon and how the canon is made? And the first is the multilingual perspective of Indian literature as such, Indian city lit as such. As the audience, I'm pretty sure, can understand that on a very soul level, as on a very deeper level, these questions are actually pretty much close to each other. How am I talking about Indian city lit? I'm even pretending to talk about Indian city lit, and how exactly that periphery is made, by what are the parameters the periphery is being made. So to answer the first one, as for the language is concerned, here is something that I would certainly admit, that although in my book especially, I have taken literary works from at least 5 different languages, probably 6 or 7, I'm not exactly remembering it. Unfortunately, all of them, the majority of them are English translations of the same. So the basic impact, and I think this is something that any literary scholar on earth working on a multidisciplinary and multi-regional perspective would be facing, because there is only a limit up to which you can learn languages. That is exactly where all these other parameters would be coming in. For example, which are the literatures that has been translated in English? Which translation is good than the other? Which translation, for example, has been done by, let's say, I'm just quoting an example from Penguin, and which has been done by some other obscure publishing house, which nobody has heard of. Maybe I haven't heard of. Which one do I trust? Maybe it could be that the other translation that I'm talking about has greater value because it has been done from somebody like the same culture and from the same linguistic culture as such, but still I ignore it. I have tried to be as cautious of it as possible. Luckily, there are several words that I have talked about in this book, especially of the Dalit literature of the 1950s and 60s in Indian cities, which even now, and that's a sad reality, even now don't have many takers yet. Especially when it comes to very internationally recognized publishers and all that, there are several fantastic works that are translated only by local, regional, small house publishers, but fantastic publishings, and after all. So that is what I have tried to do. That is, I have tried to broaden my vision when it comes to the language, but then again, due to my own inability of registering more than 2 or 3 languages at the same time. However, I certainly can talk about Bengali literature because that's a language I speak. That's my own language. And as far as English is concerned, let me just tell you that yes, there is certainly a difference. Maybe not a huge one, but there is a subtle difference. Subtle difference as such is the emotion. Let's talk about the 1970s Bengali languages. Mahasweta Devi, one of the most major names as such, and everybody has heard it. Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak has translated it, and I have read both. And what happens with Mahasweta Devi is that the language and a reader from that same language, that's my point actually. This seamless experientialism, as in I know what Mahasweta Devi is talking about. I know about what rebellion that she is talking about because I have been exposed to the figments of that while growing up at a certain stage, 80s and 90s, over there in Calcutta. I know this household because it's the typical petty bourgeois household which I myself come from. The dialogues, especially, this is exactly how I talk. And that is how it happened. These are the stories of Naxalism, ultra-leftism, and stuff like that that I have grown up on, learning them from my parents as such. So that sense will be lost to somebody who is not from the same culture, who's not from the same linguistic culture as such. And I really have no clear answer about how to overcome that. Coming back to the next question, I guess, which is about the canon, how to make the canon. What is the citylet? So let me just tell you what I have tried to do. As I said before in the talk as well, I have not taken, for example, when I was starting to write the book or the presentation itself, I never had any set idea about in my mind what a citylet is. What you have to do, that is the long and the hard way, but I think that is the only way. You will just have to read a vast number of literary works from different spectrums. It could be language. It certainly is time and history. It certainly would be based on class, caste, and gender, no doubt about that. Get your hands on as many works as possible and go through all of them and try to cull out the works which has this certain fealty to the urban soul of its background. I'm sorry that I can't be even clearer of this, but this is what I mean, is that it tries to put one foot in history and the other in the contemporary urbanity, that both can be translated somehow through that literature. But at the same time, what we did most of the time, and I remember I actually battled it severely, that my own background as an urban bourgeois born in the 80s was becoming quite a hindrance in front of me. I was just going towards more and more Bengali literature, not only Bengali literature from a certain caste, from a certain class, from a certain economic background. I'm not doing this intentionally, but the conditioning is such, social conditioning is such that I find myself being a victim to that aporia. And I think this battle, if you could say so, will never end. But then again, progressing in that manner, taking one grinding step after the other towards a dissociation of your own background to the perfect association of a vast readership, this is the best that I could do. If that is an answer, yes, it is.
Okay, we now have 2 questions in the Q&R, but Mukta, I don't know how to unmute people. I think it would be best if they could ask the question themselves.
Yeah, I'll just take care of that. 1 second.
Thank you.
You can start with Suraj.
Yeah, Suraj Sethi, do you want to ask your question? You can unmute yourself. Mukhtar, on my screen, I see Suraj is muted.
He can unmute himself. I can ask him to unmute too.
Okay.
Or Karni Singh, I've also added. These were the two people who had questions. Otherwise, you can just read them out if they are not.
Sure. Karni, do you want to ask your question? Okay.
This is exactly why this hybrid thing is
Yeah.
really
Okay.
No,
So
I didn't have sorry, yeah, Stephanie, this is Karni Singh. No, I didn't have a question. It was just an observation on how the cities evolved or developed differently in Europe and in India, and at least what the experience of late 19th or early 20th century was, where city was always evil and exploitative, things like that. At least that's the experience of North India. So it's, you know, these flaneur literatures are much later, the early literatures. There's very little writing by somebody who's dwelled in a city for more than a generation. It's always the writer himself is alienated, coming from the uprooted village thing and looking at city with a very different kind of an eye. So that was more an observation. But it may be only specific to North India.
That's like a really interesting point. I would like to know more about it, I guess, but unfortunately, I'm not in a position to provide a commentary on that, because if it is specifically to North India, then I guess I should be educating myself more than that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, Suraj, are you with us? Do you want to ask your question? Okay, I think I'm going to read aloud Suraj Sethi's question. So he writes, in the cityscape or highly urbanized areas, he used the concept of a flaneur and then developed a critique of it, bringing out the anti-flaneur. How is it similar or dissimilar to the blasé outlook as theorized by Georg Simmel?
Okay, yeah, I'm afraid I'm not very familiar with Georg Simmel's work, but I get the heart of the question. Yes, I mean, how does it happen? Like doing a lampooning of the flaneur itself. I mean, posit your character or your protagonist or yourself as the author in a setting that is very flaneury, no doubt about that. But then spin the narrative in such a way that it completely like goes out of your control, very deliberately goes out of your control. You encounter stuff which are not becoming of flannery. Is something that is completely different, something that poses a very strict challenge to the concept of flannery itself. With that, I would just like to show something maybe that would be great. And there is at least one instance that comes right in my mind, which again, something the audience would be very familiar with because of this Netflix TV series, Sacred Games by Vikram Chandra. With your permission, Stephanie, could you please share my screen just for a second?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
So I guess, yes, this is it. And yes, awesome. So the thing that I would like to show you is, here. Hopefully you can see it. I have done it to the full screen. Yes, Sacred Games by Vikram Chandra in 2006. And if you read it, actually, it reads absolutely like a flaneur novel, a description of a flaneur. I walked down the curving road to the beach in 2006. Remember, it's only 16 years ago. I walked down the curving road to the beach, past the chart stalls and on the sand. There were families walking with me, children excited into laughter by their horses trotting at the edge of the water, by the toy wallahs and their hovering silvery clouds of balloons, by the tantalizing kulfi wallahs and their cool boxes all filmed over with tiny pearls of moisture. Here, there was no war. Here was peace. I walked lightly amongst the old couple out for their evening walks and the ranks of restless young men. The sea rushed steadily up the land, and finally I sat on a half-built brick platform facing the waves, and on it goes. The thing is, the interesting part is that before and after, it's a huge novel. if you have read Sacred Games, you know that it's a huge number, but more than 1,000 pages long, and I personally think it's an awesome feat in Indian literature itself. Unfortunately, not much into the limelight until very recently. Just before and after this particular sequence, there were intense scenes of violence. One, a riot, the other, an assassination attempt. And all of these things, and the speaker of this particular phrase is Ganesh Gaitonde. Ganesh Gaitonde is the gangster of a very prominent sect of the Mumbai underworld. And he is the flaneur. At the same time, these sections of flannery are being somehow wedged between things of extreme and excessive reality, which are very decidedly anti-flaneur. That is what I mean, actually. Very decidedly anti-flaneur. So structurally speaking, what he was asking is, structurally speaking, this is the kind of a play of structure, which probably you can achieve through literature as such. Some sort of a, just give me a second, let me stop sharing it. Yeah. So some sort of a structure, some sort of a thing which gives you the hope of a flannery, which gives you the hope that, okay, fine, this is the proper way. This is the proper method of doing a flannery novel. Maybe now we can equate it with flannery and go into that same comfortable modicum that, okay, this is how it is. This is how literature is done. This is how city lit is done. This is what the Western scholars mostly are, until very recently as such, until 1970s, 100% that this has been going on. But then Indian literature, the canon of Indian literature somehow tries to frustrate that idea by putting it positionally at such a juncture that it would seem like a parody of itself, that these fleeting moments of peace and introspection and being at one with the city is violently and shakily problematized, if that's an answer.
Thank you. Do we have, I don't see any other question at the moment in the Q&A. So I think I will take advantage of this time to ask my other questions. Actually, it's more of a follow-up about what you said, you know, about your increased, of course, not increased, but greater perhaps sense of emotion when you read a Bengali author like Mahashweta Devi, because Bengali is your mother tongue, I suppose. And I was reminded of something that Sulipto Kaviraj said. You know, he's this rare instance of social scientist who's also a poet. So I think it's great to listen to him when he speaks about language. And he said in some lecture that when we Indians speak in English, use English concepts for, you know, to describe, to analyze the reality that we work on, that we observe, then we have to actually deal, and whether we want it or not, we have to deal with the ghosts of the concepts. What he meant is that the concepts are based in a European experience. The English language is, you know, a European language, and the concepts are born from a European experience. And the ghosts may not be relevant to the Indian reality that we have to observe, describe, and analyze, but you can't do without them if you are, you know, writing in English. And in social sciences, very often you have to write in English. Now, that brings me to my first reaction when I listened to you, when at first you quoted Baudelaire and Joyce. I was thinking, okay, you have this flaneur, they're quintessential European men, and they can do flannery because they actually walk in cities with pavements. Okay, this is something very, very specific to European cities, and which, you know, I'm a French scholar working on India. I constantly have to fight my own Eurocentrism because when I look at the city, I tend to have the model of the European city in mind. And I think that the risk probably is also to do the same kind of thing in literature, and to take the European city lit and look for, some kind of equivalent or, symmetrical instance in the English city lit. And, the Indian cities are very different from European cities. And I suppose the literature is very different too. Another thing I wanted to tell you is that I was thinking of other very iconic texts about the city, at the French city, Paris, actually. But, you mentioned that the flaneur is a citizen. But if you look at Les Misérables, I don't know what is the English title, actually.
It's La Misérable. I mean, that's how we know.
Okay. Les Misérables by Hugo is full of descriptions of Paris, but Paris as it is being experienced by the marginals, the poor, the children, the thieves, all kinds of people who are completely denied the status of citizens. Absolutely. And what they do loiter at some point. They very often run off, from the police, etc. But they do loiter, but they're absolutely not citizens. At the same time, I must say that I haven't read Les Misérables for a long time, and I have no idea if, when Gavroche walks in Paris, if the description of Paris are anything close to, what you mentioned by Joyce or Baudelaire. I was also thinking of Eugène Sue. Eugène Sue wrote this huge novel called The Mysteries of Paris, which is very much
absolutely,
Paris
absolutely. Mysteries of Paris is one of a very clear examples. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting to actually contrast, the description of the cities by different kind of characters, even if you stay within the 19th century novel, which is a very, specific.
I would actually extend that. I'm sorry to interrupt, actually. I would like to extend that even in other media as well. For example, even in the post-millennial times, Matthew Kossovitz has made a fantastic film called La Haine, on Paris itself, which basically shows the racially marginalized people from one banlieue to the other of Paris, a certain band of young men going through the city throughout the night and facing several discriminations as such. So again, that's an experience of the city that can actually be called anti-flaneur and all that. Of course, 100%, and could be a very fantastic research could be done that to what extent the archetypes of flâneurie as such is being maintained in novels like that, or in works like that, in films like that, and how exactly are they different, how and where exactly they're different. Yes, thank you.
Okay, we have two questions now by Marianne Helion. Do you want to ask your question?
Yes, hi. Can you actually hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for your fascinating presentation.
Thank you.
I had two questions, one of which is on drama and theatre, and I wondered how much it featured in your work, because you quoted from Lights Out.
I did.
I wasn't familiar with this play, but it sounds very interesting, and although heart-wrenching. So I wondered whether it fitted very much in your book, in your work. And the second question is sort of large, so I'm not. It's vast, right? So I'm not sure you'll be able to answer. But it was more about formal shifts, formal transformations in city lit, in Indian city lit itself, because I know that your book, takes in works from the 30s and from the 90s. So I wondered if you could give us a glimpse of the formal or generic shifts
Certainly. Thank you very much, Maria, for this question. Of course, it's a little too long, and I would try to the proper answer would be too long, but I would try to as brief as possible.
Lydia, I just want to mention that Marie-Hélène had a follow-up question to that of Marianne, and Marie-Hélène says, Marianne, do you want to say it? Because you've just prolonged the question, or perhaps I can read your question. So Marie-Hélène says, I have a similar question to one of Marianne about ruptures, and in particular, whether one can date a woman flaneur in the period cover. Yeah.
Absolutely. Actually, I'll just like to address this one first. I unfortunately have very little experience or exposure to this, but I know that especially in 20th century, there is a concept called flânez, which is basically the feminine version of a flâner as such. And in particular, I think I can see the question as well. In particular, whether one can date a woman flâner in the period covered. About that particular portion in the 1880s to 90s, I'm afraid I need more research on that. But after the 21st century, in the post-millennial era, there has been several instances, and if you give me some time, I'll of course be remembering it, where there is a very clear focus on the flânez. It's basically a more gender-aware idea of it, a more gender-aware with her own gender baggages as such. Actually, there is one example which I skipped from my presentation. Now I remember, that's great. 1965, very famous author Kamala Das of India, a poet actually. So she wrote in 1965 A Summer in Calcutta. And there is one certain poem in that, The Wild Bougainvillea. And there is absolutely no doubt that The Wild Bougainvillea from that particular book in 1965, and I'm talking about like 50 years ago, more than that probably, is a perfect example of how a woman would be writing if a woman is a flâner or flânez, if you so to speak, and she's writing how exactly the city would be presenting itself to her. Having said that, I would also like to stress on that point that to my limited understanding, Kamala Das's language or the way she gets ahead with her poetic language is this is a very complicated thing. I'm hesitating to say this actually. I think it is indiscernible from her male counterparts. That's what I mean. That's what indiscernible. It's almost like if a man is writing it. Where my point is that there is no difference as such. However, the speciality of Kamala Das's that poem is that 1950s and 60s, and this is to the other inquirer as well, Mahia, I have put 1950s and 60s Indian urbanism and associated city literature as the time of the urban grind. Why the urban grind? Because although it was a high Nehruvian time as such, and there were a lot of talks about socialism going on in the air, a freshly independent country and a freshly independent city or a cluster of cities will always find it very difficult to find its own way. Tremendous problems in all quarters, and all the significant literatures from that part, 1950s and 60s, are extremely, extremely realistic. In Sartre's term, we can actually call it the literatures of engagement, and they're like littérature engagée. If I'm sure I'm messing up my French pronunciation here. So yeah, that's the literature of engagement, and Kamala Das actually stands rather apart in her idea of the city in Summer in Calcutta. I would suggest, if you haven't read it already, please give it a read. The Wild Bougainvillea is the name of the poem. There are several others. All of them are flânere poems as such. So 1950s to 60s, and now coming to the previous question, that what are the genre shifts? 1950s to 60s, I have put on the realist aspect. Realism, most of the novels, and I didn't have to try, really. It's automatic. The majority of the novels, and from there, the majority of the novels that has dedicated themselves into the city cause as such, they're all tremendously realistic novels. Doesn't matter however much abstraction goes into the language itself, they're always very socially conscious, issue-based literatures as such. And with that, in 1960s, of course, there is this idea of Dalit literature, which I have talked over there in my book as well. 1970s is the time of the rebellion. It's the rebellious literature, and that is where I have focused probably a little bit too intensively on Bengali literature, because mostly the leftist and the socialist, I wouldn't say revolutions, but rebellions and let's say uproars of the government itself was happening towards the eastern side of the country. I have also looked at Odia literature in this case, because even geopolitically speaking, I think the south and the east cities in these places, mostly cities in the east, they were more active than the others as such. 1980s to 90s, I have talked about mostly the megalopolises, the metropolises of India, and that has continued towards the post-millennial phase as well. 1980s to 90s are generally diasporic novels. Indian literary scene is known as its contribution to the diasporic genre as such, although there are several other types, as you must have seen actually. So one part is realist, the other part is diasporic, which I didn't have the chance to talk about. However, in post-millennium, that is 2010, 20, and even right now, things have taken a turn towards abstraction. Abstraction as in presenting the city in a completely different, abstract, postmodernist ways, where even the idea of telling a story will be experimented upon in several modicums, like graphic novel, like part of a chapter and a graphic novel, like novels that have absolutely nothing to do with whatever, for example, Sacred Games. There are long chapters which have got nothing to do with the genre that it professes itself to. Crime thriller, got nothing to do with it. It's tremendous boredom, something that has been called as sublimity as in stupefying sublimity, something that is so boring that it stupefies you, but at the same time, it's very sublime as well. In short, the post-millennial, as I see, the post-millennial city lit in India is going towards the abstract, postmodernist way. It has been experimented upon, and it will be experimented on later on as well. That's an answer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have just one question left, and that is by Prakash. So Prakash, do you want to ask your question? Prakash, are you with us? Okay, otherwise I will read your question. It's a short one. Can you see it, Divya? So Prakash is asking.
Yeah, if you could.
Okay,
yes,
go
Prakash,
on.
I can hear you.
In fact, I'm traveling. I'm on a train, and a lot of background noises.
Not
Better
a problem.
if somebody could read it out.
Okay. So let me just go back to the yes. So Prakash's question was, how do you look at climatic societal disjunction the city is faced with today?
Climatic societal disjunction. Okay. All right. Climatic social. I'm afraid this is somewhere I'm caught absolutely off my guards. Climate, if I'm understanding it right, then climate, as far as my understanding goes, climate as a tangible theme in Indian art till even now is a bit of a rarity. For example, exactly the way I say that Indian city lit is a phantom canon. It doesn't really exist. Nobody has made it. It's only the interlopers like us has tried to make something like that. Precisely, I think things about to do with Indian city lit to do with climate. And to be very frank, now that you tell me, I find it the most obvious one to think about, that yes, climate, of course, especially in a city, especially in an Indian city, especially in Delhi, for example, yes, there should be a canon, but I haven't thought about that. Having said that, I do certainly remember phrases from Arvind Adiga's The White Tiger, which is again a novel widely read. Of course, you have read it, and it's set in Delhi as well. And there are long passages which probably not directed towards the climatological disaster that the city is facing almost every day, but it certainly touches upon it. And at that point, it almost becomes an expansion, or should we say extension, of the inner crisis of the characters, the ethical crisis of the story itself. The fog, the smog as such, the tremendous pollution, the river Yamuna, which is just like a shallow, I don't know, a shallow drain, and how exactly that becomes an extension of the corruption, the class and the caste disjunction of the city, its tremendous, almost criminal negligence towards the migrant laborers, people who are coming from the other things, racism, North Indian bias, North and South and East Indian bias and stuff like that, how exactly it is being extended through the description of the climate. Yes, that's the thing that I can think of. I know this is a very lame answer as such, but that is the best that I can think of right now. I can't hear you. Probably it's Mahile. Not yet.
We can't hear you, Marie-Hélène, at all. Marie-Hélène, we can't hear you.
I don't think she can hear us either.
Okay, sorry. You can hear me now?
Of course, yes.
Okay, right. Sorry, there's been a problem with that speaker. I don't know what's the problem. Yeah, I was saying I'm taking over from Stephanie, sorry. She had to leave, and I was wondering whether there was other question. I see there's no other question, but I had one, in fact, which is taking over from Marianne's questions. You've chosen the flaneur somehow as the, your line of inquiry. And since you cover a long historical period, I wonder whether you can refer to some works in which the flaneur becomes maybe a woman over the period of time, or not at all.
Yes, I have tried to answer this before. Actually, I was speaking about Kamala Das, if you remember.
Okay.
I was speaking about Kamala Das and and it's interesting because it came in the 1960s, which otherwise in Indian city literary canon is a very realist zone. It's a fresh country, fresh challenges. Everything was done in a social issue-based zone. But Kamala Das, who is otherwise, again, a very issue-based author, was a very issue-based author as such. But her one book came out in 1965, known as Summer in Calcutta. Even then, within that book, a particular poem called The Wild Bougainvillea is a perfect example of a flannery in Calcutta as such. And I also actually posited on how I do not think that Kamala Das's voice is a woman voice per se, quote unquote. There is nothing discernible in her writing from a male author, but her experimenting with that form of literature in 1965, where everybody else was going in the opposite, or let's say a different direction, is interesting indeed. That's what I say, I guess.
Right. Okay. Are there any other questions from the audience, or? Not really, it seems. So I guess I just came to close the workshop. And Divya, I wanted to mention that I'm very happy that you have presented your work in the last session of this year, because we've been discussing for a long time within our group that we need we need to have other perspectives from the one we usually have, which are usually, much more classical urban scholarship, and that it's very important to bring voices from other fields such as literature to understand the city. So I've been pushing for this for a very long time, and I'm so very happy that you could contribute to enriching the knowledge we have about Indian cities. And looking forward to more interaction with you, most probably next year or the years that follow, not this year. And wishing everybody in the audience very good break for the end of the year and a good 2023. And we are back in January next year.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Happy holidays to all of you, I guess.
Yeah. And looking forward to maybe seeing you in Punjab.
Of course. Yes, you're most welcome.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye to everybody.
I'm leaving now. Goodbye.